Alright, this is a weird one. I don't think anyone would have predicted that in 2024 we'd be talking about Predator Hunting Grounds again. This is a smaller budget title that came out in 2020 to pretty mixed reviews. It never ran especially well, particularly on the base PS4, it wasn't available on Xbox, and although it did manage to gain a bit of a cult following, including myself, it's fair to say that even long after launch there were still balance issues, missing features, and long-standing bugs. The game got its last major update in mid-2022 and since then has largely fallen off the radar. Apparently, the reason that developer IllFonic seemingly abandoned the game was because Sony held the publishing rights and weren't interested in supporting it. Now that IllFonic have taken over publishing, they've decided to continue working on it. I've never taken a third look at a game before, but with Hunting Grounds relaunching on next-gen hardware and finally receiving an Xbox port, I thought it definitely deserved revisiting. I played the shit out of it back when it was a choppy, buggy mess on the PS4, and I've sunk hundreds of hours into it, so I was keen to see what the game is like now. So in this review, I want to discuss the next-gen version, the significant updates since my last re-review, including the surprise update that dropped in April of 2024, and most importantly, if Predator Hunting Grounds is, once again, worth it in 2024. This is going to be a long-ish video because there are a lot of components that I want to discuss in detail, so as usual there are timestamps to help you skip the stuff you're not interested in. Also, I'm going to use a mixture of last-gen and next-gen gameplay, just in case you're wondering why some clips look sharper than others. I'll point this out though. So let's talk about the updates first, and before we talk about the latest updates, I want to quickly cover some of the other notable changes since my last video. Okay, there are now over 20 different predators, including the feral predator which was added in the 3.0 update. Loads of the new Preds came with unique weapons too, which are available to everyone, not just those who purchased the DLC. And yeah, both new Predators and Fireteam members are still paid DLC. New Predators are easily the area which has seen the most attention in terms of new content. It's hard to complain as a Predator main, and I guess it's how IllFonic makes money. Another game mode, more maps, or new weapons for the Fireteam would go a long way though. One of my biggest complaints back in 2021 was the level cap. This was increased to 200 and then again to 999, which is a bizarre number, I agree. I'm guessing it's probably something like the maximum number that the backend is configured for. It basically means that you can keep earning Veritanium and unlocking cosmetics. A couple of new rewards for reaching certain milestones were added, although you can fuck off if you think I'm playing 1,000 hours to unlock an unidentified alien skull. Another map was added. Headquarters is a large map with plenty of interior spaces and verticality. Yes, it's still primarily a jungle map, although it's easily the most diverse, with a number of unique areas that are almost like biomes. This provides close quarters combat as well as a lot of wide open spaces. We got night versions of each map and night vision goggles for the Fireteam too. This adds an interesting spin on how matches play out and it ties into the first film nicely. Okay, let's move on to the more recent updates. So in April of 2024, out of nowhere, IllFonic announced not only a major update to the game, the first in over a year, but a roadmap for future updates that would include new content, a current gen upgrade, and an Xbox release. Patch version 2.5 focused on player movement, weapon balance for both the Fireteam and the Pred, as well as a bunch of quality of life improvements. This included tweaks to the UI to make things easier to find. 2.5 contained plenty of bug fixes too, something the devs said was a big focus of this update. The movement changes centered around balancing. The Fireteam got a couple of nerfs to movement speed, such as when wounded and healing, but generally speaking, this update was a positive one. Jumping now uses less stamina, and the exhaustion duration after sprinting was reduced. Sliding was adjusted too, for longer and cooler slides. The big change here is weapon balance. Assault rifles and LMGs had their close range damage nerfed, and SMGs had their close range damage buffed. This means that you can no longer use ARs and LMGs as all-purpose weapons, and SMGs now have a genuine role to play. Probably the most welcome change though was to the minigun. It never really lived up to its jungle leveling capabilities as seen in the film. It had its accuracy tightened up, and both the magazine size and max ammo were increased. To keep it balanced though, it had an increase in recoil. Beyond this, ammunition reserves and pickups are less abundant for some weapons, forcing Fireteams to be more careful with what they shoot at and more dependent on having a support in their squad. On the Predator's side, Predcore interactions receive some much needed love. You should get the prompt to jump to a new position more consistently now, and moving in the trees is faster. I wasn't a huge fan of using the trees before this update, and I find myself relying on them a bit more now. The Pred received a number of other improvements too, which I know is going to make some people groan, but it got some important nerfs as well. These changes make it a bit more accessible to new players, but they also raise the skill ceiling, making it harder to be a menace. Your health, especially when it's running low, is easier to see now. The second wind healing process has also been made slightly faster. The most substantial change though, in my opinion, was to the plasma caster. It had its damage radius dramatically reduced, and both its min and max damage along with the direct hit damage was increased. This makes spamming plasma far less effective, because it no longer does big splash damage. In the past, you could just unload on the roof or walls of smaller buildings, and generally lay waste to anyone hiding inside. Now, you really need a direct hit for it to do meaningful damage. Direct hits are more deadly though, and this changes the Pred's strategy because accuracy and range really matter now. I played around with this patch on the PS4 version via the PS5 prior to the next gen update, and although most of the changes were welcome, it wasn't all good. Like with most updates the game has received, 2.5 introduced some annoying bugs. Thankfully, IllFonic seems to have been pretty quick to respond and fix them, which brings us to 3.0 was a big update that included tons of bug fixes, balance changes, and new content. Additionally, various animations, UI elements, and sound effects were improved, such as the Pred's roars, which are all unique now instead of using the same one. The biggest addition in 3.0 was the next-gen update, adding native ports for the PS5 and Xbox Series machines. Cross-play support was part of this update too, letting all platforms play together. A new predator, the Feral, was included in this update. This is the one from the recent Prey film, and like many of the other Preds, it has its own unique arsenal, including a shield that opens up some unique offensive options. It's free too, which I think makes it the first free Predator DLC, if I'm not mistaken. I've only played a few hours of 3.0, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say that this is the most stable and enjoyable version of the game so far. I'm sure that there are plenty of you waiting to chime in on the hundreds of bugs still remaining, but I reckon IllFonic have actually made some progress for once. In the past, updates often felt like they made one step forward and one step backwards, so hopefully this is a positive trend that continues. Okay, so let's talk about the next gen version. Before we do that though, I want to quickly cover the upgrade process on PlayStation because it's real confusing and it ain't free. If you're upgrading from the PS4 version, you'll need to select the game from the store and then select the drop down to see the second game option to get the generous 25% discount. This is the upgrade, which is actually a fresh install. I guess that's why both options are called game, but surely the second one could be called upgrade discount or something similar to help distinguish itself, but I digress. You'll need to manually download any DLC you had previously purchased using a similar process. Navigate to the store, this can be done in-game, which is a bit quicker, and it should be free. At the time of making this video, the Isabel and Dante DLC packs are no longer available. If you already own them, I believe you can still use them on last gen versions, but you can't transfer any DLC you own to the next gen version. Yes, this sucks. It could be a licensing thing or a technical thing because Dutch was initially missing but reappeared, so fingers crossed they can sort it out. On the upside, the Dutch and Isabel tapes remain. The last thing to know about upgrading, and sorry it's something else that sucks, is that you'll lose all your custom classes. To be honest though, I kind of enjoyed the fresh start. So, although it was possible to play Hunting Grounds on the PS5 via backwards compatibility, this new next-gen version is designed to take advantage of the more powerful hardware. It runs on a newer version of the Unreal Engine, and it introduces several graphical enhancements, including a new lighting system, better shadows, better textures, you know, the usual stuff. It runs at a much higher display resolution than the PS4 version, although exactly what it is, I'm not sure. On PS5, my guess is it's a native 4K, because that's what my eyes tell me, and also because that's what ChatGPT reckons it is. Historically, Series S ports tend to have a slightly lower resolution, so it could be 1440p, but this is purely speculation. Draw distance is improved and combined with the higher resolution has resulted in a cleaner, sharper and more visually attractive looking game. The PS4 has a very distinct grainy filmic look, which I actually don't mind, but it's hard to argue with the improved visibility in the next-gen version. Aside from the increased crispy visuals, the new lighting has made the game look quite different, especially at night. This is particularly true when playing as the Pred. Lights like the interactive markers on trees glow more intensely. Nighttime is a lot darker too, and Fireteam players will definitely need to lean more heavily on the night vision goggles. According to the patch notes, ray tracing was implemented for lighting and reflections. The new lighting looks ray traced, but I'm not convinced that reflections are, or if they are, they're definitely not used across everything. Any devs watching, I'd love to know what you think. I've seen some reports that the frame rate is now uncapped. Again, I can't verify this, but what I can tell you is that it feels stable. Playing the PS4 version on a PS5, you get a very solid 60 frames per second, and it feels smooth, but the native PS5 version somehow feels even better. You still get some occasional movement jankiness, but overall it's an improvement over the older version. Load times is another area of improvement. The loading screens before and after matches are much shorter, and the textures on items in the loadout screen load faster. Overall, this is easily the best version of the game to date on consoles. I haven't played the PC version, so I'd love to hear the report of anyone who has. Matchmaking times haven't changed in my experience. Getting a game as the fire team is mostly quick, but queuing as the pred you can easily wait up to 10 minutes. I explained why I didn't think wait times would ever change in my previous video. The abridged version though is that it's basically a numbers problem, with more players queuing to play as the pred than there are games available. You can queue to play as either the fire team or the pred, but 9 times out of 10 you'll end up playing as the fire team. Disappointingly, there's still no way to play in public lobbies with a couple of mates where one of you is the predator. You can do this in a private match, but you'll need 6 players. Ilphonic, if you're listening, please let us add public slots in private matches. Now, one thing that's worth bearing in mind for new players is that because the game has been out for so long, the dedicated fanbase has gotten pretty damn good at it. Learning to play as the pred has never been easy. The learning curve is steep, and the lack of tutorials makes getting up to speed as a new player a daunting task. Sure, the odds of running into less experienced fire teams and preds has increased, but like any competitive multiplayer that's been out for a while, you should expect to get royally thumped as a noob. It's a little easier as the fire team because you can follow your teammates if you don't know where to go or what to do. You also have multiple sets of eyes keeping watch. Running into an expert pred can be a short-lived experience, but at least you can be revived. So my advice is, if you're new to the game, be patient.
That ain't human. Help me!
All up, I think this is the best that Predator Hunting Grounds has ever been. It's never looked this good or played this smoothly, on console anyway, and I'm sure the community will welcome Xbox players by curb stomping the ever-living shit out of them, at least in the short term. Don't confuse that as me saying it's completely fixed though. It still has bugs, balance issues, and long wait times in the lobbies. These problems may get ironed out eventually, but given Ilphonic's track record and the game's history, it's probably safe to assume that it will always suffer from jank of some kind. Also, despite saying that it's the most attractive version of the game, this isn't exactly something that you'd use to show off the power of your next-gen hardware. I don't think it's a bad-looking game, it just isn't going to win any awards for best visuals. It doesn't have a single-player mode either, and this too isn't likely to ever change. This is an asymmetrical online-only multiplayer, and unless it suddenly becomes the best-selling game of 2024, adding a single-player mode just doesn't make much financial sense. I'm kind of surprised that it didn't go free-to-play. There are so many high-quality free-to-play multiplayer titles at the moment, and you got to imagine that the audience for this is quite niche. Sure, it's not expensive, but if you don't care about the Predator license, there are plenty of other games that look and play better than this. It's also an older game. Yeah, the next-gen port lifts the presentation, but the gameplay hasn't really changed since 2020. Additionally, the upgrade price feels like a bit of a middle finger to long-time supporters of the game. If free wasn't financially possible, I think offering more than a 25% discount would have provided people with a bigger incentive to return. In spite of this though, I think most of what I said in my original re-review still holds true. Hunting Grounds has a lot more to offer than when it originally launched 4 years ago in terms of content and features, and Ilphonic plans to continue supporting it at least through 2025. If you like asymmetrical multiplayer games and the first 2 Predator films, this is likely to scratch a particular itch like no other game can. And if that sounds like you, and you're willing to take some punishment early on, I still recommend this.